The British Touring Car Podcast presents 10-Minute Driver Profile, Dan Rowbottom edition.
Hello and welcome back. We are bringing you another driver profile today. As you heard in the title, we are taking a closer look at Dan Rowbottom.
We are indeed. Very quick housekeeping caveat. This has been recorded on the gap between Donington Park and Brands Hatch 2025, so the stats are correct as of that date. Obviously, if you listen to this some months down the line, you might start shouting at us. It is timestamped.
He may be on for a title win. We never know.
He is. So this video is timestamped in the delay between Donington and Brands Hatch.
Yep. So the 36-year-old driver, as of this year, born in 18th February 1989, has been on the touring car grid for a little bit of time now, but he had quite a slow start to his motorsport career, especially in car driving. Started off in karts in 1999, did those for about 7 years, up to 2006.
It's a long time to do karts for, because most people do karts a couple of years and they go up to either single-seater or into a Ginetta or something. It's unusual that you do karts for that sustained period of time. Yeah,
it's fair to say that his rise into the motorsport world hasn't been like traditional, as you'd say. So he actually went into the Seat Cupra Cup, which was the support series along with the British Touring Cars back in 2008, and you'll fondly remember possibly Plato was part of that Seat setup at the time, where if you won that championship you'd get the guest drive or
the second seat, effectively,
the second seat going forward.
Is what Rob Huff,
exactly,
fans of the show might know, did in 2004, I believe he came through.
Yeah, so he finished 7th in that championship that year and then went on to do nothing else.
I was going to say,
quite strangely,
before we got into that, what's a support series? Having looked at the Brands Hatch timetable, I'm not sure. More on that on the preview, I'm sure. Yeah, and this is the other weird thing as well. He's done karting for a long period of time, then gets into this, the tin top sort of series for a little bit, and then there's sabbaticals and there is career breaks, and there's this, which is, obviously he went back to the day job. And look, part of this is because racing is expensive. We know this. If you don't come from money or have lots of sponsors that you can get over the line, it's hard to race in any series, let alone that be Clio Cup, Cupra, F4. Everybody's got a limit to their budget at the end of the day. Yeah,
we also know that the Seat Cupra Cup back in that point was a very cheap way to get into motorsport.
Relatively cheap, yeah.
Compared to a lot of other things.
Yeah, of course.
But also, if you were good in that, you then got the attention and were able to be promoted forward, as it were. So it was actually all the way up until 2015 when he came back and started driving in the Elise Trophy, Lotus Elise that is, before then moving into the Clio Cup in 2016, which we all know and love.
I was going to say, the Elise Trophy is such a cool thing. To say that, I get to race Elises. That's, fantastic.
So he had 3 years in Clios, finishing 14th, 5th, and then 4th in consecutive seasons, taking 3 wins and 14 podiums along the way.
Which is respectable and a very competitive...
I was going to say, it was a very competitive Clio field. There were lots of top drivers who were racing in and around that some of them made that step up into touring cars, some of them didn't have the budget to, and then he eventually got round to moving up, although taking another sabbatical from the sport. So in 2019, he moved up with Sicily Motorsport and Cataclean, obviously in that black and white livery Mercedes A-Class that at the time was poor, wasn't it?
It certainly reached the end of its life cycle at that point. So obviously Adam Morgan had driven that for a long time, with various sponsors, the Wicks, and in later times the Mag Tools, etc., etc. When Rowbottom came in, it was, as you say, it was him sort of with Morgan. Obviously Moffat had run that car as well, but it was certainly towards the end of its life cycle, and as such, he struggled with that, it's fair to say.
Only scored 5 points that season and finished 27th in the championship when we had those bigger grids, and actually in 2020 he took a year out due to COVID. Obviously it was a real struggle for anyone to be able to go racing that year.
Absolutely.
And so that year out gave him the time to then go and get a drive back in 2021 with Team Dynamics. And the consequence of that was he was able to bring that big sponsorship of Cataclean with him when Dynamics were really struggling for sponsors. I think they had Halfords pull out fairly late on, didn't they?
They did. So I was just looking at the Clio Cup, going back a bit, looking at the calibre of drivers that was in that year. So slight, very quick deviation, just to read some of these out to you. Mike Bushell, Chris Smiley, Ollie Pidgley, Dan Zelos, Max Coates,
James Colburn,
Ant Walton Eels, Who else we've got down here? Paul Rivette, obviously.
The Paul Rivette, yes.
Senna Proctor and Daniel Rowbottom. Obviously, I had Daniel, obviously. And yeah, so that's to do anything in that grid is pretty impressive, to be fair. And I say this was the golden era of the Clio Cup, where there were some. A, it was the route into touring cars, and B, there were some properly talented drivers in it. Ash Hand was also in it, which
forgotten man now.
Yeah.
So yeah, in that season with Dynamics, he had a decent season. Took 1 win and 4 podiums, and actually finished 9th in the championship overall in a Honda that was fairly competitive at the time. Although the team were still struggling to get to full grips with it and be as competitive as they had been back in the day.
He had a difficult task though, because he came in to replace the Matt Neal. And let's be honest, Dynamics, Halfords, if you want to call it, was Matt and Steve Neal. They were synonymous, and it's almost like, when a big manager leaves a club or whatever, you've got big boots to fill, and it's difficult. And more often than not, it doesn't work. I'm not saying it didn't work for Rowbottom. I'm saying that it's so hard to step into someone that it's their team, and he still stuck around Matt in sort of a managerial style role, which can be positive and negative, because obviously Sir Alex Ferguson springs to mind, Manchester United, etc., sitting forlornly in the stands as they get battered again. So yeah, I think tough job for Rowbottom to come into and try and replace. And obviously at the time he still had Shedden as a teammate. Again, Shedden and Niels are synonymous with Dynamics and Halford. So yeah, tough one, particularly when you've only had a very stop-start season in the Mercedes as well. It's very difficult, I think, to then come into a top team who expects top results and perform. And I think he did an okay job, all considering.
Yeah, unfortunately, 2022, he stayed with the team, but it was a little more difficult for him. He finished 12th overall with only 1 podium. And I think that was kind of the sign of the team maybe struggling to be able to develop, having the money behind the scenes to actually kick on. And that's why we saw Dynamics actually leave the sport at the end of 2022.
Well, that
and the fact that he jumped ship, sort of, sinking ship, to Napa.
Effectively, he had a commercial decision to make. Obviously, his main sponsor is Cataclean, and they are, I would imagine, this is pure speculation, they are only going to be happy putting the money in if it's at a team that's doing well and a team that he's going to get good exposure at. Napa come into the sport, which is a massive brand in its own right, and you've got the chance to partner up with this humongous American car racing brand. It's for people that only follow exclusively British racing. People might not be aware just how big Napa is in the States. It's in the NASCAR series. It's in most of their racing series. It is humongous over there. And to have them in this championship is really cool. And the chance came to partner up with an absolutely iconic, race car brand. And he has to make the decision that suits both himself, but also his sponsors. Because if he doesn't have the sponsors, you look at another 7-year gap, but you don't go racing.
And it was an excellent team to jump into. That at that point, the Ford was absolutely dominant in 2023. He took a win and 5 podiums and achieved his highest championship finish of 7th overall in a car that completely dominated that season. Took all but 1 pole position. Won, I think, something stupid like 2/3 of all races that season as well, between all the cars. Unfortunately, 2024 was a little bit more of a struggle for him.
Well, and for Napa as a whole, it's fair to say, isn't it? The other teams did catch up.
Consistency.
Yeah, but the other teams caught up, and there was in that dominant year, it was Sutton and Camish were 1, 2, or certainly in the top 4 most races. Rowbottom not far behind. Then next year everybody caught up a lot.
Certainly did. Yeah, he finished 11th overall in the championship with only 2 podiums and struggled for pace and consistency himself throughout the season. I think he was fairly aware of that as well, and knows that going into this 2025 season he was going to need to up his game to then bring back that consistency and bring back those better results.
Yeah, he was involved in a few scuffles. I remember the Stephen Jelly at Brands Hatch comes to mind, where they ended up in the pit wall. It wasn't exclusively Rowbottom's fault, I think it's fair to point out. But yeah, he certainly, I think you're right, he got involved in perhaps 1 too many skirmishes. It reminds me a little bit in some ways of Lando Norris, insofar as I would say quite an outwardly emotive driver, very self-critical.
Yeah, definitely.
If Sutton makes a mistake, he kind of just shrugs it off and is on to the next one, similar to sort of Verstappen in F1 if you want to compare the two. Whereas Lando, you get the feeling, dwells on these mistakes, talks very openly about them. It's not criticism, it's just an observation. I think Rowbottom fits more into that side of things, of being quite open, quite self-critical. I can imagine it keeps him up at night. Whereas with other drivers, it's sort of right, shrug it off onto the next one.
We've seen that insight through the On Limit series as well, which he's taken part in, and it's interesting to see what he does outside of the sport as well. And it is very much motorsport based, going traveling, finding racetracks and stuff like that. I think there is still more to come. From
absolutely,
Rowbottom,
I agree.
As a whole, obviously having that big sponsor there behind him, like Cataclean, really helps him keep going in the sport. And I think if that were to break down, I think he might struggle to get back on the grid financially, unfortunately. But if he can keep that partnership going, if he can stay with Napa, I think that gives him a really good opportunities to win more races, take more podiums. But I'm not sure he will ever be a title contender in my eyes.
He won't be at Napa because the team's built around Sutton with the safety net being Camish, and it's difficult for Rowbottom here. Do you jump ship and try and establish yourself as the main driver somewhere else? Where that is, I don't know, because you're not going to oust Ingram and you're not going to oust Sutton. These are two of the greatest we've ever seen. Yep. They're in the debate as the best of all time. BMW doesn't look such a safe bet these days. So yeah, it's difficult. Do you stay where you are? You've got the best chance of winning races, taking podiums, but ultimately not being the number one man.
Yeah.
Or do you jump ship and go somewhere you try and establish yourself as that number one driver, but you potentially lose?
It's massive risk.
Yeah.
Massive risk.
So I think for now, he'd be quite happy. He's still young as a driver goes. He's still got time in the series.
Yeah.
And I think, to be honest with you, that it's not the worst thing for him to stay in this team for a while, and just keep growing on himself as a driver. Obviously, we touched on the gap. He's lost 7 years of his racing career, but not, or whatever it is. I'm no good at maths.
Roundabout
that gap he has lost racing
career. You can't get it back. No. You certainly can't.
So.
Let us know your thoughts on Rowbottom and his career so far, how you think he's done as a driver, how far you think he can possibly go in the sport, and maybe whether he'd go off and do other series like GT racing, whether his time in the touring cars will be a long or a short one, and how you think he'll develop as a driver.
Until then, make sure you comment, like, subscribe, all that jazz, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks very much.